I'm Jackie Gurdon and today I'm with Grey District Mayor Tony Kokshoorn. It's April 2011. Today, Tony, we're going to be talking through some of the major events and projects you've been involved with in your term as Mayor. And just looking at what they are, of course we've got the construction of the Grey District Aquatic Centre, the episode with the War Memorial gates and pillars and how they came to be erected at Dixon Park, the 150-year celebrations of Westland and the fabulous Pounamu fountain sculptures and boulders that we've got around town. Also, sadly, the Pike River tragedy and the visit by Prince William to the district. And we're going to conclude by looking at some of your plans for the future. So, Tony, let's just move into these projects as you share your stories with us. This photo here, obviously, Brian Flanagan and the Aquatic Centre, before it was there, the whole vision for that project, and you led that project, and we've now got a stunning aquatic centre there. Do you want to just talk about the need for the aquatic centre?
Look, yes, we identified that Greymouth had to lift the bar on quality attractions and our infrastructure so that we could retain professional people here. We had problem getting doctors to stay in Greymouth. So a big part of that is the services that you actually make available for your residents, and we decided to build an aquatic centre. It was an $11 million project. Now that's Brian Flanagan, who was part of our team, and it took us 6 years to raise that $11 million, but we did it step by step. We got a huge help from the West Coast Development Trust. They gave us $6 million, but the rest of it had to be raised, and we did that through getting and engaging all the contractors and the public here on the West Coast. We trucked in and out 2,000 truckloads of gravel, and that was all done free by the contractors here, never cost $1. So it was a magnificent community spirit that built that. It took us a long time. We got there in the end, and we've got a wonderful amenity up there on High Street that everyone is proud of.
Let's just have a look through some of these photos as that project happened. Of course, this was a very proud moment. It was the first turning of the first sod, really, that got the project underway.
Yeah, that photo there is where we decided to go ahead. We'd raised the funds and we were right into the building project. We had to dig up an old rubbish dump that was there, which took a lot of work, but we had a huge amount of volunteers, as I said before, and we got there with their help.
Let's just look at a couple of construction photos as the centre developed.
Yes, that's part of the excavation that we just talked about before. We had to dig down 5 or 6 feet to get a good hard fill. The old recreation ground that used to be there was used by the Maris Rugby League. That was always their playing field for the football. That was very boggy. It was always a marsh area. So we had to dig that right out and backfill it with hard fill. That is where the pool is, so we actually kept that piece out, and you can see around the edges there, that's all the hard fill, the gravel we got from the Grey River, and we transported that gravel, but we kept that part there because that was where the eventual big pool was going to be.
It's really the first shot of the swimming pool, really, isn't it?
That's dead right, that's it. And that's the construction starting. That's Evan Jones. He won the contract to build the aquatic centre, and that's his big crane that he used. That was valuable in a lot of aspects of the big build that we started at that point.
This for me is quite a significant photo because it's actually the first sort of structural vertical thing that happened.
Yes, it is. That is the hydroslide tower, and the hydroslide towers are very popular with the kids. So that's the tower which you have the staircase going up to come down those hydroslides. That is the pool. The construction of the pool was concrete, and then we had a Murphy lining, it's called, that come from Germany to build that pool. The pool was 25 metres long, and it's even used now for national tournaments.
Now this photo here is a really interesting one. This is, I guess you'd say, the first time in the pool, really, isn't it? Even though unofficially and there's no liner on it, that's the first first meeting in the pool.
Yeah, and that's you, Jackie, in the photograph there, because you were one of our fundraisers and project managers on the job, and that's Vicky Blythe. She was an important person because she represented Solid Energy, who was a big part of our fundraising. They got us across the line with the fundraising and supported us really good. So that's all of us sitting inside the 3 metre deep pool, and we're really getting progress, and at that point the whole town was starting to get excited. Yes, that's with the construction phase well and truly going ahead. The pool itself has been put inside, and they're really just putting up the walls and the outside cladding on the building. That's the Punamu boulder that we placed inside on a waterfall. That is one of our major attractions in the foyer of the Aquatic Centre. Now, that came out of the Arahua River, and that was donated to us by Ngāti Waiwai, and it was polished down at Arahua. So that is a special feature that we have that was given to us permanently by Ngāti Waiwai.
Now this next photo, we're getting into the opening of the pool itself, in the opening morning, and of course this was a very early morning for everybody. Tell us about this.
Yeah, that was one of those dawn blessings that Ngāti Waiwai did, and that is Richard Wallace there on the left and Ben Hutana, who are spokespeople for Ngāti Waiwai. They came along and we blessed it, and we had a few words, and that was the first phase which eventually led to the opening later on in the day.
And let's just have a wee look at that.
Yes, there's the opening. We got a good turnout of people. It was quite exciting. We had a lot of children there, and they were all excited, waiting patiently for the ribbon to be cut, and in we would go and then use the pools and the hydroslides. It was a great day. And there's the actual opening. That is Mavis Beatty there. She was 104 years old at that point. She was the oldest resident in the Grey District, and that's young Sutton. He is the latest child that has just entered the school system. So between the two of them, he was 5 years old and Mavis was just turning 105 years old. And sadly, Mavis died about 4 or 5 months after the opening.
Okay. Now let's just have a couple of looks at of the photos of the completed facility you've got.
Yeah, that is the Aquatic Centre all finished. Down the left-hand side there is all the parking and that, but that was the old Maris Rugby League grounds, which used to be a swampy old recreation ground, and that's transformed into a magnificent aquatic centre that the whole district is proud of.
And just one more shot of it, of course these are the very popular features.
Yes, and that there's a play park area we have on the High Street side, which is well used. We've got a basketball hoop there, and the hydroslides come down in that area as well, and we've got barbecues and all that type of stuff.
Now this photo here has got to be one of complete satisfaction.
That's a proud moment. Yes, after 6 years of really tough fundraising, that was the day we opened it, and I can tell you now it was a big relief for me.
Right. Let's have a look at another project that you were involved with, and this was obviously looking at the pillars and memorial gates and the story about what happened to those.
Well, what happened after the First World War finished, the local Greymain school, they lost a lot of people in the war. So they built some gates and pillars on that site there. Now subsequently down the track, the school was pulled down and relocated, but the pillars were there. That was a historic site for them. Now Mawhera, a local tribe here that owns Greymouth, they bought that site from the government. Now they didn't want those pillars to be there because it was too small an access way. They were planning to build a shopping mall in there. Now one day I came to work and I was phoned by the RSA, and they said, "Hey, have you noticed those pillars and gates have gone?" And I said, "They can't be." So I jumped in the car and went up there and had a look, and sure enough they were gone. Now I had a fair idea that Mawhera had probably moved them. So I wasn't sure, so I straight away laid a complaint with the police of theft, because they are historic pillars and gates that were owned by our community. And at that point that turned into a major national and international news story, which really ramped up over the next few days. We really located then, a couple of days later, that they were down on a farm that was owned by Micah Mason, who was the chairperson of Mawhera, and they were on his farm down the Arahua Valley.
So let's just have a wee look at some of these photos, because you've got photos that match all this. Obviously a close-up one of the pillars and the importance and the role that they played recognising the soldiers from World War One, and this interesting little snap of the gates actually being removed, the pillars being removed.
Yes, it was just very lucky in that at 6 o'clock when they did the Dawn raid to remove the pillars, a passerby thought it looked a bit odd, so he stopped his car and took some photographs, and they were the pillars being removed down to Arahua.
And of course these are where the pillars were taken, down at Arahua.
Yeah, they were sitting down at Arahua, and that caused a huge controversy. So what I did was I said to Mr Mason that we want those gates back because they are the property of the community. But he said no, they are the property of Mawhera because they bought them with the school. And I said no, that they can never be that. So we were to and fro for a few days. I phoned up Cross Transport in Greymouth and here and said, look, can you make a truck available with a HIAB to me on Thursday at 8:30 in the morning? I then phoned up three others, Roger Devlin, who was part of the school reunion committee, Rick Kenny, who was the RSA president, and Rick Barber, who was a member of Mawhera, and said, right, I want this top secret, but we will go down on Thursday morning at 8:30 and we will retrieve the pillars. Now, we all went to plan. We went down there at 8:30 on the Thursday morning, and there's a huge media contingent because this had a massive media following right around the world because it got to a confrontation level that followed us, and we retrieved those pillars and brought them back, and we placed them at Dixon Park.
So let's have a wee look at that. This photo here is obviously the feeling around the town, or one small photo of the feeling with the loss of those pillars. And then we look, out of that came, as you say, out of that came the rebuilding and resurrection of the pillars.
That's when that photograph there is after we retrieved the pillars down at Arahua, and that was just done with the four of us going down there. We then brought them back to Dixon Park, and that's us unloading the pillars at Dixon Park for the eventual re-erection at that site. That is the freehold site now that at Dixon Park where they are. They come up magnificently. We've actually lit them up, and at night they really look smart.
And this event here, obviously another completion of a project you're very proud of.
That is, yeah, it is a project I'm proud of because the site that we have them now at Dixon Park, it really looks good. Dixon Park really needed a good entrance. It never had that in the past. So we got a win-win out of this. We got all the pillars and the gates restored, and that was the opening day, which was a grand day for everyone. That's part of the opening as well, just given one of the many speeches that you have to give at my position.
Now we come to another project. 150 years of Westland, and you had a vision that you actually kept quite secret and happened around the town quite quickly. Let's talk about the Pounamu project and the idea and what eventuated from that.
Yes, well, after the gates and the pillars, which left a real sour taste in everyone's mouth, and it made a divide between Maori and Pākehā, I wanted to mend that situation because we all have to go ahead together. So within 2 years, we are now, which was this year just gone, 2010, that was the 150th year of Westland. So I decided I'd like to actually make a Pounamu trail in keeping with 150 years. So Ngāti Waiwai and Mawhera supplied boulders to me, which I subsequently erected around town as a sign of a partnership of 150 years, which is strong and going forward positively. That particular boulder there, that came from the Rimu dredge tailings down by Hokitika. That is a proper Pounamu boulder, and that is now sited at the railway station where we have a monument for 150 years of Westland. That particular boulder there, that is the boulder that sits outside of Stuart Nimmo's on the main intersection in Greymouth, Mackie and Tainui Street. that's where it was, just sitting in the side of the river, about to fall in. That would have been sitting there for hundreds of years. That boulder there, that is one that we got from Mawhera out of the Arahua River. That we transported that up here, and that sits outside of the Regent Theatre today. That would be thousands and thousands of years older. That would have come from the hilltops in behind Arahua and the in the Southern Alps, and that now it sits in a pride of place outside the Regent.
One of the things I get a real sense of too is the very hands-on approach you had with this real passion in that, to actually get up the rivers and have a look and get involved in the project rather than just waiting for things to arrive.
Yeah, I think, Jackie, the secret in life is that everyone comes up with ideas, but it's the person that actually rolls their sleeves up and gets out there and gets on the coal face that can make the ideas into reality. So it's not just good enough to have an idea anymore. I think if you have an idea today and you really want it to come to fruition, you have to roll the sleeves up, you have to get out there, you have to organise it from the start right to the finish.
And of course the end result.
Yes, and that's that boulder from the Rimu tailings. Look at the beautiful green punamu that comes through. So what we did was we carved and ground through the casing to show you what is in the shell of a stone like that. And that's the beautiful prized punamu that Maori came here for originally to New Zealand way back in 1300. So there in that photo is Mary Tulloch. She is the oldest member living for Ngāti Waiwai, and also Ben Hutana and myself.
And of course the second one.
And that is a magnificent centre point of our 150 years. Jade carver Ian Bostridge and his wife Kay generously donated that stone and sculpture, which was worth up to $250,000. It sits in its pride of place outside of Mackey Street and Guinness Street on the intersection, and it is a fountain. It has water running over it, and it depicts the water running down from the Southern Alps down to the sea. It's a beautiful, beautiful sculpture, and it sits there, and we're very proud of that as part of our 150 years of Westland celebrations.
So Tony, let's just have a quick look at those lovely features. Firstly, this one here, of course, is the pounamu that is down by the railway station. And of course the plaque that gives the history of the purchase of Westland back in 1860. And of course the fountain in central Greymouth that we're all very, very proud of. It's absolutely stunning. With of course the description of how the fountain was made and what it represents. Tony, this next picture here, when I used to look at this picture, I used to think about the stunning landscape of the West Coast and just how magnificent it was. This photo now to many people here is well known as tragedy and grief. Obviously the Pike River seam, you described this as the West Coast darkest day, and of course we had the tragic loss recently of 29 miners in the Pike River disaster. Let's talk about that.
Yes, that is the escarpment. That's where the mine is, up in the southern Paparoas. That's Mount Hawea there. And it certainly was our darkest day here on the West Coast, where we lost 29 of our loved ones down that pit, and they are still there to this day. And they have not got the remains out yet. They're still trying to get them out, but it was a tragic day for us here. But that is the escarpment, and that's the reason why they knew the coal was there in the first place. That is the tectonic plates from the Australian plate that flows across the top of the New Zealand plate, and that's where the land has been thrust up, and in that is two big coal seams. There is the Brunner coal seam and the Paparoa coal seam. Ironically, the Brunner coal seam is the one sitting on top. If you look hard enough, you can just see the black seam there. But it is the same seam as in 1896, where 65 miners were killed at the historic Brunner mine site just up the Grey Valley that you see today. So that is the same seam that runs through, but it is disjointed through faulting, through earthquakes over thousands and thousands of years. But that is the mine, and yes, that now is a sad sight to see.
Looking at this was really the start of the project.
That was. We campaigned, and I was probably the face of the campaigning for the Pike River coal mine for 10 hard years, going to Parliament all the time, because we needed some access over dock land, and that was a sticking point, but eventually we got that. It was a big day for us, and that was when they were starting and building the portal, which is the entrance to the coal mine. That portal there goes through solid rock, and it cost up to $50-60 million just to get through blasting over 2 years, down 2.3 kilometres till they hit the coal seam itself. That is the day of the explosion. That is actually the second explosion. The first explosion happened on the 19th of November. Then we hung on to hope that somehow the miners would be in there still, but 5 days later the mine exploded, a massive second explosion, and that is the ventilation shaft that came out from the coal mine itself, and that is the heat that was coming up through that. But that was the day all hope was dashed, and we knew that we'd lost our men. That was a very, very sad time for us here on the West Coast. And that was subsequently, we knew the men were gone on the second explosion, but because of the conditions of the mine with the methane and oxygen, the mine kept exploding. So that was the smoke coming out of the ventilator shaft, which is 140 metres from the Paparoas down into the mine. That was after the fourth explosion.
So those photos really talk about what happened up in the mine itself, but obviously socially in the community here, dramatic things happened as a result of that. Just talk a wee bit about what happened, Tony, because you were right at the centre of all the media, all the politicians, and really a global camera coming into Greymouth, into our community here.
Yes, it got huge worldwide coverage, and it probably got that because just 2 or 3 months earlier we had a situation in Chile where a whole lot of miners were trapped down a mine too, and it had a magnificent outcome where every single one of them were brought out of the mine even though they'd been there for a long time. So the whole world thought, hey, can this happen twice? So we had a massive media circus from all over the world. You can see them back in the background there, that were camped here for weeks on end. And from day one, when the mine first exploded, the police told me of the event. I went straight up there and I stayed immersed in it right from that point on. That photograph is when the Prime Minister, John Key, who was a great support, he came down here 5 times through it and helped wherever he could. But that was after we'd found out our men were dead, and he came down to help set up a memorial service. He did say at that photograph there to the media he wanted the memorial service to be held in Christchurch, which was the nearest big city. But just subsequent to that, I said to John, I said, look, we're just coasters. We know we can put a good memorial on out at a moto, which is a racecourse just outside of Greymouth. We can do it, and it will be in the shadow of our men in the Paparoas. So he agreed to let us go ahead with the memorial service, and that photo is where he agreed, and he also presented us with a condolence book. And that is the memorial service at Omoto. That is the Governor General and his wife, Peter Whittle, who is the CEO of Pike River Coal, and his wife. That is myself and Lynn, my wife, and Brona Key and John Key, the Prime Minister.
And of course, terrible time, I said, with Peter Whittle here too, at the forefront of it all. He must have gone through a terrible time as well too.
Yes, Peter did go for a lot, and he presented himself very good at the family meetings with the media. He explained to people exactly what was going on in the coal mine. He was the CEO of Pike River Coal. He had only taken that job over 3 months earlier. Subsequent to that, he was the general manager.
So just having a look at that memorial service, it was a tremendous thing. Omoto was absolutely packed, And it was interesting too, being a business person in town myself, you had this real sense while everything was going on, you just were in limbo. It was a feeling that I found really hard to describe, but it was interesting talking to people after the service that you had, that we sort of felt that we could begin again. And I don't know what drove that, but let's just have a wee look at that memorial service, because it was a tremendous tribute to those people.
Yes, they are the families of the dead miners sitting in the grandstand in front of the memorial stage, and that is the Paparoa Mountains where the men lay in the background. But that truly was a magnificent day. I called on all ex-coasters to come home and help us grieve, and they came home by the trainload. There was 11,000 people turned up at that service. We were only expecting 5 or 6, but everybody came. You could walk down Mackey Street in Greymouth, there wasn't one person in downtown Greymouth during that service. Every shop closed. It was truly magnificent the way the nation just pulled in behind us and grieved. There you have the many school children throughout our district, and keep in mind this memorial service was entirely by the people from the West Coast. We got no one in from outside to help us with it. They are the school children doing one of the many songs at the memorial.
And we got a beautiful, stunning day too. It was incredible out at Emoto on that
day.
It
was magnificent, yes. And the backdrop and our rainforests, and you'll see in front of the school children there, they are 2 of the 29 displays that the families made for each one of their lost loved ones, and they come up magnificently. And there are all the VIP people from the stage after the service, all picking up ferns and walking in front of those 29 displays from the dead men and placing ferns on their displays. That shot there is on the far left. You've got Bill English. He is the Minister of Finance. Then Brona Key, John Key's wife. Then the Prime Minister, John Key, and myself, and just in behind us are bodyguards for John Key. And that's when I talked at the memorial service, and in behind me, just on the left of the screen there, is Bob Parker. He is the Mayor of Christchurch. Now Bob didn't know it, but he was about to get an earthquake so devastating we are still in shock as a nation because of it. He had had the first earthquake in Christchurch, which was 7.1, which did a lot of damage, but 2 months after this shot here, they had an earthquake which killed 180 people.
And certainly your speech at Emoto, Tony, was tremendous as well too, and as were all the presentations really, and of course beamed out to the whole world.
Yes, it did. That was beamed out to 600,000 people watching it on TV just in New Zealand alone, and many more throughout United Kingdom, Australia and United States. It was just an enormous event. In fact, John Key has told me since that out of all of the functions that he has had to go to as Prime Minister, that one there was probably his pride and best memorial or best event that he's been to.
Now this photo here, you're obviously, after the service was held, you passed by the tables for all those miners.
Yes, it was such a sad point because what it showed was just ordinary everyday people that played sport, had good times, had wives, children, families. It was just a little show cabinet of each dead miner's past, and it was so sad to see it because in behind that was the grieving families too, so it was an extremely sad part of the memorial.
And of course, Tony, the memorial wasn't just held on the West Coast. One was held in Christchurch as well too and followed. And this is obviously a photo outside the square with the cathedral as it was at the time, and people getting ready to go into that service.
Well, we've exported many of our people to Canterbury over the years. In fact, there's 20,000 people from the West Coast that live in the Canterbury area. So Christchurch said to us, look, we want to put a memorial on for you as well. And that was the Christchurch Cathedral before it lost its tower and was devastated in the earthquake. That was just 2 months before that, but that was the memorial they put on for us. The church was packed with 1,000 people. They had a big screen outside and there was many people watching it out there too. But it was well attended, and it was a wonderful way that Christchurch reached out to us coasters and said, you're not grieving on your own, we're going to help you.
And just having a look at that service, and I guess for me there's two things in this particular photo. Firstly is the service itself, and you've referred to the Canterbury earthquake a couple of times. I mean, the cathedral was just hit terribly, so this to me has quite a lot of historical significance from that point of view too.
Oh, I mean, that is a significant photo in the way that Canterbury actually rallied behind us and helped us. But as you say, Jackie, that we did not know was in between the two devastating earthquakes they had. So little did we know what was coming when we were sitting in the cathedral. And that was after the service, after everyone had left. They were all the deans and vicars in Christchurch, and that because it was combined, they all come together. That's just all us shaking hands and having our last hurrays.
And of course, the whole impact of Pike River and getting the community going again, we've had visits from all sorts of people, and I guess this photo is just one example of the sort of things that happened after the tragedy, with really key, talented, important people to New Zealand and to the West Coast doing things to help the community. Just tell us about this one.
Yes, so many people came and helped us mourn and grieve our lost miners. And that photo there is where the Warriors and the Newcastle Knights came and had a huge game of football here. In fact, it is the highest attendance in history on the West Coast to a sporting fixture. We got 5,500 people out at Wingham Park. But before they went and had the game, that is the management of the Newcastle Knights and the Warriors placing flowers on the Brunner mine site out at Brunnerton, and that was a very sad moment as well.
And of course, a very important event also happened with Prince William coming as a part of that as well. Let's just talk about that. Yes,
this was a wonderful act of compassion. Prince William, who is being married to Kate Middleton in 1 month's time, took time from his busy schedule, and because we had had very tragic occurrences down here in the Southern Hemisphere, we'd just had some massive floods in Queensland, and there's a lot of loss of life there. The Canterbury earthquake and, of course, the Pike River disaster. He said, look, I'm coming down, I want to help you grieve. Now that is where we went to Shantytown, and he wanted to speak to the families of all the deceased miners. So we had them out there at Shantytown, and he spoke for 2 hours to all those families. Now that's Prince William sitting at the entranceway to Shantytown. That's my wife Lynn behind me, and that's us going in to see the families. And that's one more shot just coming through the entranceway of Shantytown. He was such a talkative person, a very down-to-earth person. He was the type of person that you could actually just sit down and have a drink with and have a great conversation. Him and his brother Harry, they've seen tragedy themselves. They lost their mother under tragic circumstances. That's Princess Diana, when she was killed in the car crash. And he has to deal with that too, and I think he inherited some of Diana's compassion, and that's why he wanted to come and share some moments with those families, and he certainly did, and he reached out to them and they really appreciated it. That was just having a good laugh. We had all the families and we spoke to them for 2 hours, then we had some VIPs in another room at Shantytown. When we went in and I introduced Prince William to those people, we were just going over one or two of the aspects that we had actually talked about with the families, and I was telling the families and the dignitaries in that room about his compassion. But one or two of the conversations, that particular conversation I was saying about, I'd asked Prince William about whether he was having a stag party because he was getting married in a month, and he says, "Oh yes, of course I'm having a stag party." He says, "I'm only human," and I was saying that he was extremely worried about what his brother Harry and his friends had lined up for him, without saying too much to the media. That's when we first started talking to the families. That's Neville Rockhouse he's talking to there. He's the health and safety manager down Pike River coal mine. We had all the families in groups of 7 or 8, and we'd go from each family to another. And the Prince, he was a great conversationalist. He would talk about anything. He had great humour, and he really made everyone feel at ease. So between the three of us, really we had some great talks with those families, right down to where he would explain to the families that him and his brother, they, as we said earlier, lost their mother in tragic circumstances, and he said that he, to this day, still copes with that outside of the media gaze. Behind closed doors, him and his brother Harry continually talk about it, and that's how they deal with it.
And then obviously you've had some key events happen in the last 6 months or a year here, Tony, and of course you always need that support. You know, what you're doing impacts on your family life as well, and I know there were certainly shots in the media of Lynn during Pike River there supporting you, and sometimes you could see the pressure and the stress, but how well you managed all that very difficult role leading a community through these sort of things.
That's a photo of me and Lynn, yes, and Lynn was a rock to me through this. Because of the media attention it got, I was just being lined up day in, day out with total media scrummages coming at me. So we were getting so many calls from around the world. In fact, we were deleting 400 calls that we couldn't deal with on the cell phone every single day through it. And we were answering at least 200. So Lynn was holding my cell phone. She'd answer a phone for me, just pass it to me. Also my PR here person, Diane, she helped as well with Lynn, but that went on for weeks. Lynn was right behind me. There were people in the neighbourhood that were making food from us because we were out night and day. So the community got right in behind me, but I would have been a lot worse at the end of this if it wasn't for my wife, Lynn.
Yeah, and when you do look at what you've had to deal with, you do need that support. There's pressure on both of you to do the sort of role a mayor has to do and lead a community. And I guess now let's just talk a little bit. I'll just put the next photo on. So Tony, you're in your 3rd term now as mayor, and I guess this is a great photo there to sort of start talking about what are you looking at doing in the future? What are your plans for the next few years?
Yes, that photograph there was taken last year on the Hawea. That's a ship that has adopted Greymouth, and that is Maureen Pugh, the Westland District Mayor, and myself coming from Westport on the ship. And we were just thinking to ourselves, it was election year coming up, so we're gearing up for the election in these photographs here. I mean, we've been business, the two of us. So with elections coming, we couldn't be better equipped. But when you talk about the future, I enjoy the mayor's job. This is my 7th year as mayor now, and luckily that election did come and go, and I don't know if the gun had anything to do with it, but no one stood against me in the election, so I've never been opposed, and I'm in my 3rd term now. But I work very hard at the job, and I think mayors have to today. They have to be the voice for their community, and we have to be always looking at economic development. So there's a lot more to do on the West Coast now. 10 years ago, we'd been through a 30-year recession. Now, for 10 years, we've had good growth here on the West Coast. We've got a bit of a recession at the moment, but overall, everything's going well. We know we're going to get a big knock from the Pike River mine disaster and the $190,000 jobs that money washed through the community, so it was good for us. So we have to rebuild our economy now. I'd like to do that. We're underpinned by forestry, we're underpinned by farming, tourism, and we're on the cusp of a big wave for the minerals industry, albeit we've had our problem at Pike, but coal mining is really expanding here. So I see a rosy future, but we can't rest. We have to drive that forward, and I think as a mayor you have to lead that growth.
Thanks, Tony. It's been wonderful working through these projects and getting an insight into some of the key events that you've had to deal with, and best of luck for the future.
Thank you, Jackie.